Let's look at how we implement solutions in the Anypoint platform. When we think about what we need to implement, we're really talking about a number of different things. First of all, what's the pattern that you are trying to implement? Could it be non-API based integrations like maybe PubSub, ETL, batch, and streaming? Are you implementing an API? First thing we want to do before we really start writing any development is go out and see, is there something we can reuse? And then if we are going to implement anything in Mule, we have orchestration, transformations, unit testing, and the ability to publish that sample code that we build out to Exchange so that others can leverage it. But when we look at what we're able to build, it's all kinds of different patterns that we've talked about in previous videos. Migration patterns, broadcast patterns, synchronization patterns like we need with 360 projects like Customer or Product 360, aggregation and analytics projects to support those, correlations that we need to deliver, and of course API gateways as well as API-led connectivity solutions that we're looking to deliver out there. And So before we start developing anything, first thing we want to do is search. There's a lot of things that might already exist out here. For example, you just look at what MuleSoft has provided, let alone what your company may have published into Exchange. You'll see connectors out here. For example, Salesforce connector, Amazon S3 connector, MongoDB connector, Twilio connector, and the list of connectors goes on and on that you can scroll through and explore. When we look at templates, if I'm going to implement something, the connectors make it easy to build an application. But if I can go out here and, for example, take a Salesforce to S4HANA cloud order migration connector, can I use that? So I can come out here and explore that particular template that someone might be able to use. If I'm doing Salesforce org-to-org syncs, I can come out here and I can see that someone has already published that bidirectional sync template into Exchange and has implemented the logic that was required to do that bidirectional sync. And I've had some people say, well, I'm not doing an account bidirectional sync, and they look in the repository or in Exchange and they don't find the entity type they're looking at. Well, you can still take this template and use it as the pattern, and you're just going to swap out what entity you're working with. For example, maybe you're not doing account, maybe you're doing case. So I can just change what I'm looking at and leverage that. So the templates are out there. We have examples, policies, APIs, RAML fragments. All of those things are out here in Exchange with documentation and sometimes videos, as you can see, on how to leverage that particular asset. So that's what we want to look for first, is there something that we can leverage? Then if there's not, then I start looking at how can I implement something. And if we focus on APIs and how we implement an API, then I can build that in Anypoint Studio, or I could build something in Rustlet Studio or any number of other technologies that are out there. But if you're looking to do it the fastest way, with the least amount of effort, the least amount of code, then you're going to want to do that in Anypoint Studio. And in Anypoint Studio, the reason why people can do this quicker, and less skilled people are more proficient in it, is because you're not writing any code. You're leveraging pre-built, pre-tested, pre-tuned, pre-security screen components that you're just going to orchestrate, and the code is embedded in those components, so you don't have to worry about any of that. So let's go and look at how we get started. Well, we have a blank project here, and what we're going to do is say, I want to implement an API. Well, instead of starting with a blank project, let's go ahead and let the studio actually do something for us. So we're going to create this BKR account API. I'm going to pull in that spec. You see I can pull it in from Maven, but I'm going to actually pull this in from Exchange. And here is my API that I want to use. You'll see I can drop down and pick different versions of the API that I might want to base this on. I'm going to base it on the latest one. And now I'm going to click Finish. And what this is doing for me is, instead of me starting from that blank project page and trying to figure out what do I do now, we're going to actually generate the scaffolding for this project. So I generated the scaffolding. We can see down here that scaffolding was successful. And what it generated for me is a router that's going to take that incoming request on my HTTP listener and route that to the appropriate method to invoke. We see it also has all the error handling in here that we had defined in the API. It gives me one of those API consoles so that I can actually test it, just like we saw in API Designer and in Exchange, where I can go and use that to test my API. And then what we see is, for each method on each API, when I implement projects in Anypoint Studio, I'm dragging and dropping. I am not writing code. If you're writing code, we consider that a bug. But what I'm doing is leveraging pre-built, pre-tested, pre-tuned components and pre-security screen components to build out my solutions. So as you can see in this project, we're going to be working with Salesforce. And you don't see any code in here. It's all drag and drop components. And the way I go about building things is I simply pick my connector, and there's a couple of them that are already in this project. I could add additional connectors into my project, for example, if I wanted to work with Workday. And I can even add additional modules into my workspace. So if I wanted to maybe work with SAP, I would simply pick that I want to work with the SAP S4 OData connector, and I can click on download. And now what I'm doing is downloading that connector into my workspace so that I can leverage that to integrate with SAP. And now you see the different things I can do within the SAP environment. Explore this project. When I go in and define that I want to do a query single against the account object in Salesforce, what it's going to do is return for me the metadata for that Salesforce object, for my Salesforce object. If I have any custom fields, those will be returned as well. Now, we're implementing an API in this case, so we're going to need to map that data coming back from Salesforce into the JSON payload that my API has defined. And it's literally just drag and drop. Drag from Billing City, drop on Billing City. Drag from my website on the left side, drop on the website. And what that does is it creates this data weave code that does the transformation for me. And not only do I get the code, but I'm able to actually go ahead and do a preview of the data that allows me to see, what does this transformation actually do? And I can change the payload in here. So if I changed my website, for example, to www.brettrader.com, then I see over in my result, it has changed from Brett Rader to brettrader.com. Now, this is a huge value in implementing solution, because I didn't have to go back and rerun my project that I have in here and set a breakpoint so that when I'm debugging this, it stops here, and I can see after that what my transformation does. This allows me to actually see the result of my transformation without ever having to run this in debug mode. And that allows me to save a lot of time on making sure that my transformations are correct. When I'm implementing different patterns, different solutions in Mule, you're going to need to do routing. There's different types of routing and flow control that we have built out of the box. I can do a choice, I can do first successful, round robin, scatter gather, there's for each and async, and many other options that I can leverage. I simply drag those over, drop them in, and then configure those components to do my routing. I'm not writing any code. When it comes to batch processing, there's a batch scope that allows me to drop in batch steps with processors and aggregators and have multiple steps that I'm going through, and even an on-completion step. And this is tailored and tuned to support handling larger volumes of data more in a batch processing type of approach. We support data transformation. You can write code in here if you want to do data transformation, but you can also just come in and drag and drop from the left side to the right side to build out a transformation script that provides the results that you're looking for. And that's the purpose of Data Weave. Data Weave really allows me to actually go in and do any-to-any transformations, whether it's CSV to JSON, JSON to Excel, Excel to an EDI format, whatever the case may be. Data Weave allows us to do transformations from anything to anything. And as we said, if you need to know code, if you find you're writing Java in Studio, you might want to reevaluate what you're doing and say, is there a connector there? Is there a core component that I could leverage? Because you shouldn't be writing any code in Studio. If you do need to write code, we can drop in whatever code that you deem appropriate, whether it's Java, JavaScript, Ruby, drop into here that particular component and then write the code that you need to. But you shouldn't not have to do that, and it should be something you look for when doing project reviews. There's an integrated debugger. As I'm running a project, I can step through this and see the various values that are current within this. I can change the values and really debug my application as you would expect in any modern IDE. And if you do find you need to extend Mule, we have couple hundred connectors and various core components and all that. So most people do not need to extend it. But if you do need to extend it, Mule was built to be extended. And there's a full SDK that supports that. People always ask, can you integrate with source control? Absolutely. And you can tie in this case, we've hooked in to a Git repository, and we're just storing our code in there. But whether it's Subversion or TFS or whatever code you're working with, Anypoint Studio runs in Eclipse and can integrate with almost any source control product that you might be using. So in summary, Anypoint Studio gives us a way to quickly not only develop, but to integrate testing into the process as well. We can implement various patterns, as we discussed, but don't start building anything until you've looked in Exchange and see, is there something out there that I can start with? And then we have all the orchestration, transformation, and capabilities that you need in order to build solutions, no matter what they might be.